Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says the silver lining in the pandemic is that social capital and trust have increased. And this trust is crucial in shaping Singapore's response to future crises. In his closing speech, Mr. Wong talked about how the government, the people and the private sector came together to deliver the best outcomes. He also called for unqualified support from the opposition. Ms. Shao Teo explains.
After thanking members of the House for sharing their views over the past 2 days, Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong called on the leader of the opposition to give his party's full and unreserved support for the motion without conditions. He was referring to the Workers' Party's position that it supports the motion to the extent that it expresses gratitude to all in Singapore who contributed to the COVID-19 fight and affirms the government's efforts to learn from lessons.
I'm not sure why there is a need for such qualification, because after all, Mr. Singh himself did highlight the need for us to set aside politics, to close ranks, and to uphold unity of purpose in a crisis, which I fully agree with.
On the 72.3 billion Singapore dollars spent over 2 years, Mr. Wong pointed out that it's less than the $100 billion budgeted, and that with that expenditure, the nation achieved relatively good outcomes compared to other countries.
We kept businesses afloat and local unemployment rates low through the job support scheme and other financing support. This helped to preserve firm capabilities and allowed businesses to bounce back quickly when the worst of the crisis was over.
There were other intangible benefits too, like keeping schools open and switching to home-based learning to minimize disruption to education.
On the whole, compared to other countries, we've achieved good value for the monies we spent to stave off the most severe downsides of COVID-19 and to mitigate long-term economic and social scarring.
80% of the government's expenditure was spent on preserving jobs for Singaporeans and keeping firms running. Another 10 for grants to medical providers and the remaining 10 for procurement with third parties, such as those that set up the community care facility at the Expo. As for resources spent by state investor Temasek for the nationwide distribution of test kits and masks, Mr. Wong said these efforts are part of the firm's corporate social responsibility outreach.
The resources for this comes from the portion of its positive wealth-added returns that Temasek would typically set aside for community initiatives in the Temasek Foundation. This is a decision that Temasek and its board made independently of the government, and there is no draw on past reserves from such spending.
Harnessing these resources from both the private and public sphere is how Mr. Wong says the government has been able to deliver outcomes for Singapore. But the one element he deems especially crucial in shaping the whole nation's response was the trust that Singaporeans placed on the government, something he says was not taken for granted.